Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, May the 13th, 2025. Today I want to talk about King Charles. Not for any particular reason. I thought it might be a good opportunity to do an update on his chart. I haven't looked at it for some time, see what's going on in his life, and I think it would be a good opportunity to revisit a few astrological techniques that one might want to use. For example, primary directions and of course solar returns. And it's always a difficult subject talking about King Charles because at the moment there are stories that he's very ill, that maybe he's not going to live very long. I don't know. As an astrologer, one has to be very careful with life and death, particularly death, particularly when it comes to dealing with kings. There is a certain feeling that as astrologers one shouldn't predict the death of kings or try to predict the death of kings, and that's certainly not what I'm going to be doing. But I think if I'm looking at primary directions, it might be a good opportunity to look at a technique that astrologers of previous generations in the West used to use to try to predict death. For example, Placidus of the Placidus house system fame, in his book Primum Mobile, how do I pronounce that? Primum Mobile, he talked about some of his predictions and how he predicted that certain people would die. So it's not about predicting whether anyone is going to die, it's more about looking at the technique. And so I thought that might be an interesting exercise, but I must emphasize I'm doing it in a theoretical sense. But before I do an update on King Charles, I keep forgetting that. Before I do an update on King Charles, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Tuesday, May the 13th, 2025. By the way, if you like this video, feel free to indeed like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be very happy to have you as a subscriber. So here is the chart for today, which is Tuesday, May the 13th, and this chart is set for New York. So the moon is at 3 degrees 43 Sagittarius. So that means we've got the moon changing signs, moving from Scorpio into Sagittarius, and this sign change takes place at 9:35 a.m. London time. So if you are in Europe, then this morning, that's a Tuesday morning, the moon moves into Scorpio. Same for Africa. If you are in the Americas, then by the time you get up, the moon will be in Sagittarius. So it is very much a moon in Sagittarius day. Now, if you are in Australia or New Zealand, the moon won't move into Sagittarius until this evening. So just before the moon moves into the Sagittarius, it makes an opposition to Uranus, and it makes a trine to Saturn. So, moon trine Saturn is a pretty useful aspect. It's an aspect that is stabilizing, and moon in Scorpio trine Saturn in Pisces. Yeah, it's an emotional aspect because you've got water signs involved, but it's about taking control of one's emotions and not being overwhelmed by them. And of course, with moon in Scorpio, one can get a little bit too intense. But perhaps you have to see moon in Saturn against moon opposition Uranus. So the moon just before it moves into Sagittarius in late Scorpio makes an opposition to Uranus, and that can stir things up and can create a certain amount of instability, and people can be stubborn and they want to dig their heels in, and In certain cases, they might be spoiling for a fight, and then Moon makes a trine to Saturn. So Moon trine Saturn might stabilize some of the energy that is being stirred up by the Moon Uranus aspect. So that's the Moon, and the Moon, when the Moon moves into Sagittarius, it makes a trine to Neptune and a sextile to Pluto. I don't think I need to say too much about that. Moon trine Neptune, Moon sextile Pluto. These are very mild aspects. They might allow us to be able to sort of tune into something. Moon trine Neptune, we might be a little more sensitive than usual, but it's Moon trine Neptune fire signs. So maybe with Moon trine Neptune, it's perhaps easier to connect things which don't appear on the surface to have any relationship to one another, but one looks at them again and one starts to see possibilities. And so that's the Moon. So it's probably a welcome change, Moon moving from Scorpio into Sagittarius. I mean, the Moon in Scorpio is fallen. It can be problematic for some of us. When the Moon moves into Sagittarius, you get Moon in a fire sign, and it makes things more exciting. There's more action, and when one thinks of Moon in Sagittarius, one thinks about openness, people being clear about what they think, about what they believe. And additionally, we've already got Mars in Leo. You've got Venus in Aries. You in fact have the beginnings of a grand trine in fire signs. And so as the day progresses, as the Moon moves through Sagittarius, the trine between Moon and Venus and Moon and Mars, gets closer. Now that exact grand trine won't be until tomorrow, but I think we're going to feel it. And it just may feel that there's just more energy, more action, and it just may seem to be just more exciting. And the Moon aside, there is a decile between Mercury and Saturn. Mercury and Saturn are 36 degrees apart. That's 1/10 of a circle. So with Mercury decile Saturn, it could be about the attempt to be disciplined and focused. We may have an idea that we can take control, that however chaotic things are, we can take control of our immediate environment, and we can bring some kind of order. That might be how Mercury decile Saturn works. And it might also be about communication. Mercury decile Saturn may be the idea of being able to say something in a very disciplined way, not necessarily using very many words, but being able to get straight to the point. And it's an idea. And we can have this, when we've decided we want to talk to someone about a serious matter. We've got it in our head, we're going to really deal with it now. Now's the time. We don't really want to do it, but maybe we can do it with Mercury decile Saturn. So that's the broad picture from the viewpoint of New York. If we look at the chart for Sydney, Australia, it's slightly different. So if you are in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia, then for most of the day the Moon is going to be in Scorpio. And Moon in Sagittarius, well, you'll get that, right at the end, but it may be too late to do anything about it. So it's a Moon in Scorpio day. Probably the main aspects to be concerned about or to be interested in are Moon opposition Uranus and Moon trine Saturn. So that Moon opposition Uranus could be something you feel if you're in Australia and New Zealand. It's quite a stubborn aspect. something feels as if it has to give, but will it give? And some people might really be holding on to something, very tightly, and it can be explosive. It's the kind of explosiveness that takes a long time to build up. Nothing happens, and then bang, it happens. And so you need to be aware of tension as it builds up, and it may be a good idea to do something to relieve the tension, because the moon having made an opposition to Uranus, it goes on to make a trine to Saturn, and that might give you an opportunity to stabilize things. And then there is the heliocentric picture, looking at things from the viewpoint of the Sun, and Venus is square Saturn. So Venus at 25 Sagittarius, square Saturn at 24 Pisces. So Venus square Saturn. We've been feeling this aspect for the last few days, and so with Venus square Saturn, it just may feel that it's quite difficult to get on with people, particularly on a close level. We can get on with them in terms of what needs to be done, but getting close to people, especially on an emotional level, might be difficult. So perhaps one should just accept that. And that's just the way it is short term. Venus can also be about money, and it may be just broad concerns about money that people have, that society has, with Venus making a square to Saturn, and that's probably the main aspect today. We also have Mars slowly moving towards that opposition with Saturn, and that aspect, when it happens, it could be quite difficult. Are we feeling it yet? Maybe we're just starting to feel it. And Mars opposition Saturn could be about the attempt to make something happen, but can we actually achieve anything? And there could be a degree of frustration. And it may be about frustration in the world. It may feel that things are so close to coming together, and people appear to be talking to each other, but they're not, and it's just very difficult to see it through. So, the heliocentric picture is not, I would have said, especially exciting. You could say the same for the geocentric picture. I don't think astrologically it's a massively significant day for most of us. Doesn't mean to say that things won't happen in the world. They will happen. I'm sure they'll happen. We have just had a full moon, and full moons take a little bit of time to work their way through. Okay, the moon, of course, is now in Sagittarius, so the moon is no longer in the opposite sign to the Sun. Okay, unless you're in Australasia. But I think a lot of us will be feeling today that we are recovering from that full moon. The full moon might not be as intense as it used to be, but we now have to maybe deal with the consequences of a full moon. And one part of the full moon experience can be seeing the truth. We see the full picture, and now we just have to deal with it. And the question is, do we deal with the truth, or do we decide that we don't want to bother with it? Because just because we know something, it doesn't mean it changes anything, and that's always the lesson with full moons. So let's now look at the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Tuesday, May the 13th, 2025. Aries. Aries, you do want to be, out and about, and you want to have an impact. You may feel that, recently something, had been holding you back. It was perhaps too serious for you, or it all looked a bit difficult, and there might have been a psychological dimension you didn't really want to bother with. But this thing, whatever it is that's been holding you back, is starting to get weaker. I think you're feeling better able to be yourself and to step into the limelight and to enjoy, whatever might be available. So there's absolutely no reason to limit yourself, and you now have an opportunity to be yourself, and in the process you might see how things work in a way that you hadn't before. So recently there may have been a feeling in Aries land that things just didn't really come together. There were things that you noticed, but you didn't really see the connections. But now, with the moon moving into Sagittarius, the connections are becoming clearer, and you can perhaps start to see how the parts move together, and that might give you a greater ability to understand the broader picture. But understanding often has a cost. You often understand things that you don't always like, and you may be aware of aspects of human nature, aspects of your own nature that aren't necessarily very pleasant, and that might be a little bit shocking, but you shouldn't worry about it too much. It just says something about today, and today, many of us, regardless of our sign, are just aware of darker feelings that are just lying there under the surface, and that represents other people's feelings. It also represents your feelings as well, and perhaps what you need to do is just incorporate everything into a broader vision. Unpleasant feelings are just part of life's experience, and when you are able to see things in a broad perspective, you can start to see how things work. So it is a good idea to be as open-minded as possible, and not to just focus on just one thing, particularly if that one thing is especially negative, because that's something you can do. If you just focus on one thing and you ignore everything surrounding it, then you make this one thing too significant. I think that's going to be more of a problem perhaps if you're in Australia or New Zealand, because the moon is going to spend most of the day in Scorpio. But if you're in the Americas or Europe, I think it's going to be easier for you to see the larger picture, and once you can see the larger picture, you'll start to see possibilities that things really can move. And if you can't see possibilities, then maybe other people can see possibilities, and perhaps you should be giving other people a chance. That Venus-Mars trine, which I've been talking about for some time, is getting ever closer, and so with that Venus trine Mars, you can really benefit so much from other people if you just give them a chance. And additionally, I get the impression that there are one or two people who really have a real vision. It's a vision that is pure and spontaneous, and it's actually something that you can benefit from. So don't think, Aries, that it's all about you having the ideas, you being the initiator. Perhaps other people have got something to offer. They may have a new way of looking at things, and those other people might be very close to you. Might be someone you spend all your time with, but you haven't bothered to listen to them. I mean, you've listened to what they say sometimes, but not all the time, and maybe they've got something to offer. And so do give other people a chance, and you don't have to do everything on your own. Taurus, you are at the moment quite optimistic. you believe that many things are possible, or at least you can believe that many things are possible. I mean, there is a danger, Taurus, that you get sidetracked on sort of short-term concerns. Something seems to require a huge amount of your attention or a huge amount of your worrying power, and if that were to happen, then, well, that would be unfortunate, and you'd be wasting time, and you'd be wasting the opportunity. And what you really should be thinking about is the possibility, the possibility that things really can move and develop in a new way. So do not be satisfied with the way things are. It's absolutely unnecessary to be. You have a vision of everything that is possible, and so perhaps, Taurus, you should find a way of communicating that vision and telling people about it, but in your own way. It's not a day for being completely unsubtle. I mean, there are temptations in that direction. I mean, the moon is in Sagittarius, and so with the moon in Sagittarius, you might feel that you just have to say what's on your mind and do it in an open and direct way. But I don't think that's really quite the right approach. I think you need to spend a little bit of time, working behind the scenes, and you don't have to be always, you don't always have to be entirely open with everyone. But there is a way, and even if you don't talk to anyone, you can still feel that really things are improving, or things can improve. But short term, you just have to you have to take it one day at a time. And right now there are things, I think, that do have to be worked through on your own. You might like to get some help and tell people what's on your mind, but would anyone understand? And this is a time, Sagittarius, when you have the capacity to understand things in your own way, and all you have to do is just have constant focus, be prepared to to keep going, to keep digging, to keep looking for something, and just be open. And don't restrict your searches to just one area. Whatever you're searching for, you might be searching for the truth, you might be searching for a lost object, but don't make assumptions about where something is, because it may be somewhere different, and somewhere different, the place you least expect something to be, might be right in front of you, and that might be where the real inspiration lies. And so if you try to be too much of an extrovert today, then you might not get very far. But you still have this underlying optimism that is going to really carry you through. And there is then the question of where can you get the support? And well, it's always good to look for support, but I think that people who know you well are the people you should be spending time with. It's not a day for spending time with people who you don't know very well, people who don't know you very well. Because if you spend time with people who don't know you very well, then things can happen. There's always opportunities for showing a side to your personality that may not be very welcome. But people who know you well, they know who you are. They know your idiosyncrasies, and so it's a day which is a little bit complicated. It's not necessarily completely easy, but you should be looking for something, broader, which goes beyond your normal experience, and that search might be quite personal. It's not something you do with other people, and also we shouldn't forget that heliocentrically, Venus is making a square to Saturn. And so Venus is your ruler, it's making a square to Saturn. And so with that square, it just might not always be the case that you can just get on with people. Again, if people know you well, it shouldn't be a problem. But if you don't know someone, then how are you going to be completely open with them? Certainly not with a heliocentric square, but between Venus and Saturn. Gemini, you are quite sensitive at the moment, and you're feeling different things more than usual, and you may be quick to pick up on other people's feelings, and if you're picking up on other people's feelings, then that may have an impact on your own happiness, even your own stability. So Gemini, by all means get close to people, but don't get so close to people that you don't fully know what's happening. And remember, the moon is now moving in from Scorpio into Sagittarius. So moon moving into Sagittarius, it can be a time when you have to spend time thinking about other people and what people want, and maybe you shouldn't feel that you have to do anything or suggest anything. See what other people have got to offer, and that might just be the best approach. There are some things, Gemini, that you possibly want to keep to yourself, and maybe this is a process that started with the full moon. So we had the full moon on Monday, so we had the full moon yesterday, and so you're still trying to think it through, and this full moon reminded you that you are in some ways alone with your own particular issues. There are things you have to do on your own, and you can't necessarily rely on anyone else, and it's still there, though the moon in Sagittarius means that you do have to think a little bit about other people, and you have to perhaps let them make the decisions, because maybe you don't want to make decisions. It's just not something that especially appeals to you. Now, arguably, the main aspect affecting Gemini today is a decile between Mercury and Saturn, and maybe you should really absorb this decile aspect. And so this decile, 10th of a circle, 36 degrees, that's what a decile is, and it's about what you are trying to create. And you start by trying to create something in your mind. And I think many Geminis have an image of organization right now, of how they'd like things to be. And it may feel so different from your everyday life. If you look around you and you look at the chaos around you. I'm probably projecting here, but we all have to deal with a certain amount of chaos. But we know as Geminis that things could be better organized at the moment. And it all starts with a vision of organization. And the question is it a vision of organization, or is it a fantasy? Is it a fantasy that just everything can be perfect? Magazine perfect. No, but let's not talk magazine perfect. But even some Geminis might have an image of home and garden perfect life, everything is in the right place, everything is wonderful. And if you've got that kind of image in your head, then go for it. With this Mercury decile Saturn, you can actually turn that into something real, and you can live a life that can be photographed, or rather you can live in an environment that can be photographed. From my perspective, that does seem a complete fantasy. But that things could be done better, and things could be better organized, and it's not just a fantasy. And if you really concentrate on it with that Mercury decile Saturn, I think you can really achieve something. And so maybe it's just about incremental change, incrementally making things better and easier, and clearing a path through the garbage, maybe. Of course, it depends on how things are for you. So Gemini, it's not necessarily an especially exciting day, but it's not an especially exciting day for many people. There's not a great deal to talk about. It's one of those days today for any of the 12 signs, but you have to make the most of it, and probably the way to make the most of it is to use that decile to just have an image about the way things should be organized, and then with this image in your head actually make it happen. Cancer, the moon is changing sign. It's moving from Scorpio into Sagittarius, and with the moon moving into Sagittarius, you may feel that there are things that just have to be done. You've known they had to be done for some time, and you may have put things on hold, but now might be the time where you have to just get going on it, when you have to sort of bite the bullet. And it's really nothing to be afraid of. So why delay anymore? And if you really start to work on something, you can start to see new possibilities. So if you are working on something, it may start off as being rather boring. You kind of know where it's all going, or at least you think you know where it's all going, but it feels rather dissatisfying. But once you keep going, once you keep making changes, small changes, then things do start to fit together. And one aspect we have got today is a sextile between the Moon and Pluto, and this Moon-Pluto sextile is I would have said helpful. It allows you to create real change without having to be confrontational about it. So you move through life, you make one change after another. You're perhaps afraid that you might get a negative reaction, but you don't get a negative reaction. And so you don't have to be happy with the way things are. You can move things to the next stage, and I think you can do it in a way that can be very successful. And I think that also you might be inspired by small things, inspired about what it's all about. Sometimes you're wondering what you're doing and why you're doing it, and there might even be a bit of an existential question. What is your direction? And in the process of just doing something that appears to be quite trivial, that doesn't seem to be especially important, you may have a sudden sort of feeling of just harmony, that something actually is working. and as a result of that, things things can really start to move, and you can actually develop a sense of purpose where, to begin with, it appeared that there was no sense of purpose. So I think that is something you very much can do, and so don't feel that it need be a boring day. It might start off appearing to be a boring day, a day that is going nowhere, but as soon as you actually engage with the day and its challenges, you will start to get a very real sense of purpose. Leo, the sun still in Taurus. You can enjoy the benefits of the sun in Taurus. I think sun in Taurus is a time of year when you can be thinking about yourself and where you want to go and what can allow you to be successful, and you can get satisfaction from many different things, and you're not afraid of dealing with things which other people might not want to touch, and so that could actually give you a real advantage. And if you are in a competitive situation, or if you're trying to be successful at something, you go in places that no one else wants to go into, and you see the benefits, and it may be rather like isn't there that phrase? Is it a Yorkshire phrase? Where there's muck, there's brass. So where there's mud and unpleasantness, that's where the money is. And so, if you are ambitious and you're looking for money, or you're looking for opportunities, go to places that are perhaps not particularly savoury. I mean, don't take me literally. I'm not suggesting that you do anything dangerous or you do anything criminal or anything like that. But you do have to be, you have to be open-minded, and you also have the ability to just deal with things that other people just can't deal with. Now, that might not have anything to do with action. It may just be to do with what you find interesting. Some Leos may find things that are unsavory to be absolutely fascinating and almost inspiring in a sort of weird kind of way. So if something looks sort of difficult, unpleasant, and unsavory, then don't just pass by. There may be something there for you, though, as I've already suggested, we don't want you taking any risks. Now, elsewhere, we do have the moon moving from Scorpio into Sagittarius. I think, with the moon in Scorpio, it was a bit difficult for Leos because, we had this full moon. We had, yesterday, Monday, we had the sun in Taurus, we had the moon in Scorpio, and I thought that could be a little bit difficult for Scorpios. Sorry, for Leos. It could be challenging. You may be aware. You might have been aware of sort of everything that was holding you back, and you may have been unwilling to do anything. I mean, you saw the challenge, but were you able to actually embrace the challenge? But with the moon moving into Sagittarius, things are getting easier. There are more opportunities for action, and I think in general you have a more positive approach, and you're more curious than usual, as perhaps I've already indicated. You're interested in things that other people want to stay away from, but it's just a general curiosity, and you're also prepared to try things. You're more experimental. I don't think you have been especially experimental over the last couple of days, but you're prepared to give something a go. You're prepared to see if something works. I mean, who knows what might happen? I mean, it could work. So it's important that you do give things a chance. And if you're doing something different, you could well be excited by it. And so in the end, there could be a real feeling of just happiness, doing something you enjoy, and that's something you should be aspiring to, happiness, because today you deserve to be happy. Although the things that might make you happy might be a little bit unusual, and additionally, let other people have an influence on you. Perhaps you don't have to do everything on your own, and other people have their own views, and maybe they really have got something to offer. The moon is making a sextile to Pluto, so moon sextile Pluto may be about sort of transformation, seeing things in a completely different way, perhaps with another person's help. So don't ignore other people, and if someone appears to be in a strong position, that doesn't necessarily mean you should stay away from them, because it may be a day when you can actually benefit from another person's strength and another person's strength of purpose. And when you see what another person can do, and you realize what another person is all about, that could actually be quite a transforming experience. Virgo, you may feel that it's a time when you want to take things easy. You don't necessarily want to be in a huge hurry to do everything, and additionally, you may feel a little exhausted and overwhelmed, not necessarily in an unpleasant way, but you have been sort of moving this way and that way, and you haven't been quite sure where you've been going. And of course, you had to deal with the full moon on Monday, and perhaps you're still getting over that full moon. And now it just might be a time, Virgo, when you don't really want to do anything in particular. And if you have the opportunity to spend time at home, then I think that would be good. It would certainly allow you to recharge your batteries, and you need to get some perspective, because there's been a lot to think about, and you can't really get a perspective if you're surrounded by people, or if you're trying to deal with one concept after another. If you've got one thing to deal with and something else to deal with, and people are pressurizing you to respond, I mean, how are you going to make sense of anything? And so if you really want to make sense of things, perhaps you should adopt quite a serious approach, and also put yourself in a position where you have a lot of control. And this is further emphasized by the fact that there is a decile aspect between Mercury and Saturn. So this decile aspect, Mercury is now 36 degrees away from Saturn, so 36 degrees, 1/10 of the circle, and it is what you're trying to create. And this decile may not be especially exciting, but I think it could be useful. It's about you having a strong will, deciding what you want, and deciding probably that you want things to be done in a particular way. There might be lots of ways of doing something, there might be lots of options, but Mercury decile Saturn is asking you to focus on just one thing, and you want it done in that way. You don't want it done in any other way. And to begin with, you don't have much influence. But if you keep working on that vision of how you want things to be performed, created, how you want things to look like, and it might be, I think it's quite a particular vision, and structure is going to be important. I think actually Virgos are looking for structure today. They don't want any chaos. They don't want things to be ambiguous. They want to know where things are, and they want to know where they are. And if this structure feels as if it's missing, then I do think that you're able to actually create the structure through the exercise of your will. And by exercising your will, you can just cut through the chaos and the nebulousness of life and really find some real stability for yourself. Libra, you do have quite a lot to say. In fact, you have more to say as the day continues, as the day unfolds, and you shouldn't be you shouldn't be afraid of expressing your opinions. I think actually many people want to know what you think, and sometimes the best way of expressing yourself is to be open and not worry too much if you get a negative response. I mean, don't worry. I mean, that's something that Librans can do. Librans don't want to upset anyone. They just want to do things in a way that is going to meet everyone's approval. At least that's what a textbook Libra is supposed to do. But you shouldn't worry about that. The key thing is that people understand you. That everyone understands you, and they understand they understand what you're on about, and they understand what you're trying to say. And that's why sometimes you have to be a little bit outrageous, because if you try too hard to keep everyone happy, well, nothing gets done, nothing gets appreciated, and it's all rather tedious and unsatisfactory. So if you need to shout, Libra, then feel free. And the moon in Sagittarius makes a sextile to Pluto, and so moon sextile Pluto actually allows you to use words as a means of creating some kind of transformation, and that may actually be useful if you happen to be working today, or if you're trying to make progress, if you're trying to get people to do things your way. Through the power of your words, you can not just get people to listen, but they can pay attention to you. And so don't underestimate your own power, because I think that Libra, if you put away your doubts and you really believe in yourself, then I'm really confident that you can make things happen. Scorpio, you are perhaps feeling the sign change, the moon changing from Scorpio to Sagittarius, and this sign change is likely to impact you, because you've had the moon in Scorpio for some time. You've had a full moon. I mean, yesterday, Monday, there was a full moon, and that full moon was right across the main axis of your chart. The sun was in Scorpio, moon was in Taurus, and so there were things that you were aware of, you became aware of, and it might have been relating to other people, and you perhaps could start to understand people for the first time, or starting to understand them. But the problem is that when the moon is in Scorpio and the sun is in Taurus, it's all a bit too intense. And so you could say that when the moon moves into Sagittarius, when the full moon loses its its immediate power, then you start to get a little bit of perspective, and you can start to consider the consequences of things. You can have ideas, you can have realizations, but what actually is going to be the consequence of these ideas? And the moon in Sagittarius may say something about you being able to adopt a different view, and being able to get some objectivity, and also starting to become aware of maybe the financial consequences of past decisions. So, or you think you've made a decision, or you were about to make a decision. With moon in Sagittarius, it perhaps allows you to work out the numbers, and if the numbers don't match, or if you think you're going to be spending too much on something, well, maybe you need to go back on a decision. So Scorpio, don't feel that anything is written in stone. And it's not just about money. Some Scorpios may feel that they've actually made a commitment, and that you have to hold on to that commitment. But you don't have to. Everything is fluid with moon in Sagittarius, and if you change your mind, it's absolutely okay. Some people might get upset if you change your mind, but really it shouldn't worry you too much. And additionally, Scorpio, as you go through the day, you might come across things which you regard as being somewhat unpleasant. Unpleasantness is there, and you can see maybe the evil that men and women do. I mean, I don't want to make that too dramatic, but it's clear. And so there could be a moral awareness today, a moral awareness of how people do bad things. And perhaps in the past you'd seen that people had, that you thought, at least you'd thought that people had just made mistakes and they didn't really know what they were doing. But now it's occurring to you that maybe some people are doing things out of genuine malice. I mean, not to you necessarily. I'm not saying that you have to be excessively worried about it, but it can be quite an eye-opener when you start to think about what people's motives really are. And as a Scorpio, you kind of may have felt this all along, but now maybe it's becoming clearer. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. It is possible that a few Scorpios will be tempted to do something today which is immoral, something you shouldn't be doing, but you feel, well, maybe you'd like to do it. It may even pique your curiosity. What would it be like to do this, even though you know it's bad? Now, you're probably not watching this video if you're that kind of Scorpio, so it probably doesn't apply to you. But I did think that I should point that out, because there is something a bit edgy about today, and being aware, of the evil that people can do. So I really don't want to scare you. That's not what I'm trying to do. I think that overall, it's a day when you can really exercise your freedom, when you don't have to be committed to anything. You might have thought you were committed to something, but you're not. Of course, if you exercise your freedom too much, then you might get into areas that really you shouldn't be getting into. But I think if you're sensible, but not too sensible, then I think that you should be able to get the balance right. And don't forget, Venus is now just a couple of degrees from Mars, and from a trine with Mars, and so with that aspect, you can benefit from other people, not just because Venus is making a trine to Mars. I mean, this aspect it's getting closer and closer, but it's also what the moon is doing, because the moon is making a trine to Venus and it's making a trine to Mars. So we are actually getting a grand trine forming between Moon, Venus, and Mars. And I'm thinking you're already starting to feel it, especially if you're in the Americas. And this grand trine may actually be really great for relationships. It may give you the opportunity to really get on well with people. The odds might seem to be against you at the beginning of the day, but the moon, the moon making that aspect of Venus and Mars can create a sense of excitement, and so do give people a chance. And it may be that there are events that bring you and someone else together, and these events may not seem on the surface to be particularly sociable or even particularly pleasant. It could be that a mutual concern about money, for example, makes you and someone else realize that you've got some common ground. So that might say something about some kind of partnership or arrangement. So if there is a financial dimension to something, then that might actually, in a strange way, bring you and someone else together. It could be that you and someone else have a common financial complaint, or it could be a financial target. But whatever it is, and that might be the springboard for some kind of relationship. Sagittarius. We have the beginnings of a grand trine in fire. The moon is moving into Sagittarius, into your sign. That in itself is good news. But when the moon moves into Sagittarius, it starts to make a trine to Venus, and then it makes a trine to Mars. Now, that trine between Venus and Mars it's not exact today. It is exact tomorrow, but the moon is applying to Venus. It's applying to Mars, and over the next 24 hours, less, because it does depend on your time zone, the grand trine will be as exact as is possible. And so this grand trine could be exciting, just in a general sense. I think it can be a day that where there is a lot going on, and you don't have to be bored. There's absolutely no reason to be bored. The moment the moon goes into Sagittarius, now moon going into Sagittarius it changes sign. Well, this morning if you're in Europe, very early in the morning if you're in the Americas. Okay, that might be late in the day, this evening if you're in Australia or New Zealand. But then you've got moon in Sagittarius to look forward to tomorrow. So at some stage for all of us, the moon will be making this grand trine today and tomorrow. So in a way, when you look at today, Tuesday, and tomorrow, Wednesday, we could see a certain amount of continuity. The moon is still going to be in Sagittarius on Wednesday. So maybe you shouldn't regard Tuesday and Wednesday as being separate days. They're just part of the same movement. And this grand trine in fire signs just makes you feel good, or it should make you feel good. It makes you realize that there are real possibilities out there, and there can be action and inspiration. And if you're not happy with the way things are going, you can change it. And I don't think you're going to be alone. Venus and Mars are natural significators of other people, and so, other people in a sort of a one-to-one sense. So, moon in Sagittarius, your enthusiasm, the enthusiasm that is just a fundamental part of what it means to be a Sagittarius, can just get people's attention, and you come over as an exciting person, and you can also benefit from people who are themselves exciting. So there can be a lot of excitement and a lot of action, and if you feel that nothing is going on, it just could be that you're not trying hard enough. If you spend all day alone doing nothing, well, what can you expect? Well, what can you expect? Okay, even if you're alone, there can be a feeling of excitement. You don't necessarily need other people to be excited. You can be aware of what is possible, and this grand trine in fire signs could actually be it could be very creative, and it should signal sort of new possibilities, and also just a feeling that you know what's right. You don't have to work it out. You just know, and because you just know, then it's going to be easy to take the right initiatives and to make the right suggestions. And when we look at the spoken word, I get the impression that you really are able to give a good account of yourself. You're able at the moment to speak with great power and conviction, and you can inject some energy, even a little bit of anger if necessary, into the things you say. And because of that, there's going to be something about you that really is going to be compelling. So don't underestimate your influence. And if you feel that people aren't listening to you or aren't paying you enough attention, then Sagittarius, it may just be a question of turning up the volume a bit. Okay, not just making more noise, but coming over as being sort of more insistent, maybe a little more angry, and then people are definitely they're definitely going to pay attention to you, and in most cases they will follow your line of argument. Capricorn, the moon is leaving Scorpio. It's moving into Sagittarius, and when this sign change happens, there can be a change of gear, and Capricorns may feel that they have done what they need to do, and that you don't have to be in the center of things, that you can take a few paces back, and you could say observe things from afar. Now, you don't want to be totally disinterested in what's going on. You have a keen intellect. You're thinking about what's happening, and if you've got something to say, you're definitely going to be able to say it. No problems there. But as far as your general happiness is concerned, it just may be that you don't want to be right in the thick of things. You'd rather do things in your own way without getting much attention, and probably you're going to be most effective when you are undisturbed, when you're making your own decisions, when you're not reliant on anyone else's approval. And so that might just be the best way of dealing with the day. And you certainly shouldn't feel that there's anything that you absolutely must do, though there are a few things you could be doing which are important, but they're important because of you. You've told yourself that they're important. You haven't been told they're important. You've put yourself in a position where you've realized it's just down to you. And so, Capricorn, there may be a feeling of, personal responsibility. There's something that you have to do. No one else can do it. No one else has got the inclination or even the skill, and so that comes down to being, your responsibility. And as far as relationships are concerned, people are always concerned about relationships. Is it a good day for relationships? I wouldn't have said that it's a particularly good day, because you might be focusing on other things and you're not really in the mood for sort of caring and sharing. And from a heliocentric view, Venus is making a square to Saturn, and Venus can be the planet of relationships, and Saturn, of course, represents you. And so Venus square Saturn can indicate a bit of uneasiness when dealing with another person. It's not a long-term problem. It's just something passing as Venus makes that square to Saturn, and it just may be a reminder that you want to be self-sufficient and self-reliant, and you don't really need anyone else's help. Though if you are in Australia or New Zealand or in Europe, perhaps earlier in the day, it might be a slightly different picture. And that's because the moon, before it moves into Sagittarius, while it's still in late Scorpio, does make a trine to Saturn. And moon trine Saturn from a relationship angle can actually be quite a good aspect. And it allows you and another person to at least understand what you have in common with one another. And so maybe right at the beginning, ideally that would perhaps be yesterday, Monday. So if you're looking at this on Monday in the Americas, that moon trine Saturn, you perhaps need to use. That moon trine Saturn is about making sure everything is sorted out between you and another person. And if you're in Australia or New Zealand, you can take advantage of it today. If you're in Europe, then this morning perhaps. You might have to be awake quite early. But hopefully you will have sorted things out already with another person. Just something needed to have been resolved, and once it's been resolved, you don't have to worry about things, and you can do things your own way. So that comes back to my point that I don't think that today is going to be particularly memorable from a relationship angle, unless perhaps you're in Australia and New Zealand. If you're in Australia and New Zealand, it is a different matter. But I think for most of us, it is a day for enjoying one's own company, and for doing what we feel we need to do without getting anyone's help, assistance, or advice. Aquarius, you are able to interact with lots of different people. You're quite open-minded, and you will enjoy social variety. So you don't have to be restricted to any one person or one place. And the moon is making a sextile to Pluto. So moon sextile Pluto has a direct relevance to you, with Pluto moving through your sign. So moon sextile Pluto indicates that in your own way you can be quite influential. People are going to take notice of you. People will listen to what you say, and even if they don't listen to what you say, the things you do can create change. And as soon as you introduce yourself, as soon as you make an appearance, you create a change. The atmosphere has changed, and it will change for the better. And so things are really looking reasonably good. And also the moon in Sagittarius is making a grand trine, really. Moon is making a trine to Venus, it's making a trine to Mars. Now that trine to Venus, trine to Mars, you won't actually feel that until tomorrow, but there's still a grand trine energy today in sectors of your chart that are actually very sociable. And so this underlines the point that you can have an influence, and you can maybe be more fiery than usual. Aquarius is an air sign, and sometimes people say about Aquarians that they can be a little bit dry and detached, but I wouldn't worry about that. You can bring down some fire, and you can energize things. So if you are somewhere where there doesn't seem to be much happening, you can make it happen, and you can just light things up. And additionally, you've probably got some important things to say, and the words could matter, and you'll have to work on these words, and you may not be immediately confident about your ability to say something, but if you work on it, then I think that soon enough, Aquarius, you will find your voice, and Aquarius, people will listen to you, and it will be clear that you do have something very important to say. And going back to that moon sextile Pluto, in your own way, you are able to transform your social environment, but not in a way where anyone gets hurt or anyone gets upset. You can just do it in a fairly natural way. Pisces, today you're starting to make up your mind. Recently things hadn't been very clear, and there were some possibilities that you might have really wanted to explore, but you've been through it all now, and ideally things are starting to clarify, and you're beginning to know what you want, and you're being more forceful about it. In fact, today you really can be forceful with the things you say. You can speak your mind very clearly, and you can engage your passion, and because you can be clear and to the point, that means that people are going to be listening to you, I think. And so if there's anything you want to say, anything you want to write, then then go for it. You shouldn't be afraid of how anyone's going to respond. I think actually today people are going to appreciate honesty, and today, Pisces, you can be honest. Some Pisceans don't like being too honest. They like to kind of go about things in a rather sideways fashion and sort of evade the issue, but it's not a day for evading the issue. If there's something you want to communicate, then you should communicate it loud and clear. And at the same time, there are things you want, and you want them pretty quickly, and you're not really in the mood for delay. And if that's the way you feel, then go with it. And the moon is making a sextile to Pluto. Moon in Sagittarius making a sextile to Pluto, and that allows you to have an impact, and you can do things which get everyone's attention. And if you're not happy with something, you can gently create a situation where it changes, and where it changes in your favor. And from a specifically material view, there is a grand trine in fire. Grand trine in fire is coming up, and this grand trine is not exact today, but today and tomorrow overall there is a grand trine feel, and I do feel that that Tuesday and Wednesday, today, tomorrow, are kind of part of the same process. So it's not really about sort of dividing up Tuesday and Wednesday, saying they are discrete days. They're not particularly discrete, and so Tuesday and Wednesday can be seen as part of the same time frame. And so the moon is making a sextile to Venus, making a trine to Venus, it's making a trine to Mars, and the energy of this grand trine can actually be very useful for you, Pisces, and it can help you make things happen. And it's also about your ambitions and how you want to be rewarded and how you want to organize things. They can all come together with this grand trine. So if you're working today and indeed tomorrow, or if you're doing something connected with business, then this grand trine really can allow you to make things happen. And it might not seem exciting to begin with, but really it's not really about excitement. It's about simple action and you just understanding how you want things to be. And you have a moment where you have a vision about how you want everything organized. And I think that you're going to have no problems communicating this vision. And once people get this vision, things can really go your way. So Pisces, I think that it looks like being a constructive day, and also a day which is high energy. Might not seem like being high energy to begin with, particularly if the moon is still in Scorpio at the beginning of the day. Certainly if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon is in Scorpio for most of the day, but eventually the moon moves into Sagittarius, and that is where things start to happen, where you are really able to move into gear. But you don't regard Tuesday as being a single day. Tuesday and Wednesday are the same unit of time. I think it's important that you see it like that if you want to make the most of things. So if you haven't finished something today, then it's not the end of the world. You can see it through tomorrow. So yes, Pisces, it is looking very constructive and very positive for you. And it's now time to look at Tuesday from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Tuesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 50, which is the cauldron. This is a ritual cauldron. It's an elaborate pot, and it is something very special. It's not just a random cooking pot. It represents everything that you are. You try to put things together into the cauldron, and maybe you create some kind of alchemy, and something new comes about from it. And it's kind of appropriate that we've got the cauldron as the moon is moving into Sagittarius, because the tarot card that I think what one can associate with the cauldron is probably Temperance. And I think that Temperance is a tarot card which is connected with Sagittarius. And Sagittarius is about bringing things together, making connections. And one might put into the cauldron things that on the surface have no connection with one another, but through the alchemy something happens. That's when the magic happens, when I won't say you create the philosopher's stone, but you at least are able to distill who you are. And with the cauldron we have a moving line, and the bottom line moves, and it's all very well putting everything in a cauldron we have, all our various abilities, talents, resources, and so on. But, every now and then, we try our hardest, but it just gets a bit messed up. And if things are messed up, then how can the alchemy actually work? Things have to be done really, really well. I mean, isn't it like with atomic bombs? When they were first making atomic bombs, the precision with an atomic bomb is really, really incredible. Everything has to explode at the same time. If you're trying to, what is it? You have these lenses and these sheets of explosive, and they have to go off at the same time so they can push the ball of plutonium down simultaneously to create the explosion. And if things are messy and if they're not properly shaped, you're going to get a fizzle. And there could be a feeling at the moment that we're trying our hardest to bring things together, but it's just not working, that things are fizzling. Maybe some parts are not properly machined. The timing is wrong. And so, what does one do? Well, bottom line moves. And the bottom line, maybe it gives us some hints. And what the bottom line is saying is that the cauldron needs to be turned upside down. It's okay to turn the cauldron upside down, because what you're doing is you're clearing it out. We need to review how we've been going about it. And the cauldron, this moving line, can actually represent a new regime, a new approach. So if we want to start again, then we need to clear out the garbage, let it all drip out. It doesn't sound very pleasant. I mean, one thinks of fat and animal grease, and I'm a vegetarian, but you just want it out of the cauldron. You want it clean, and once it's clean, that's great. You can start again, and so the cauldron represents the new beginning, and we can start filling that cauldron again. This time we're not going to make mistakes. This time things are going to be done properly, and we will have everything in order, and the parts will be properly machined, and we can get a clean explosion. Can you get a clean explosion with an atomic bomb? Well, I'm not really talking about atomic bombs. I mean, I get obsessed about radioactivity sometimes, so that's probably a rather inappropriate analogy. And we have the moving line. So because we've got a moving line, by the way, this moving line, the I Ching regards it as being entirely positive. You just clean out the pot, nothing wrong with that. And then you move to a second hexagram. And the second hexagram you move to is hexagram 14, possession in great measure. This is regarded by some people as the best hexagram in the book. We get what we're looking for. Now, possession in great measure may say that we already do possess things in great measure. And it's not necessarily about money. It may be about personality. We've got everything we need. And so going back to that cauldron, we do have what we need. In the past, we hadn't put it together properly, but now we can put it together properly. And we do indeed have possession in great measure. And all of those parts come together, and the alchemy can take place, and we can get real results. Now, possession in great measure can be about money. If money is important to you today, if you're trying to get hold of money, if you're trying to sort something out financially, or you're trying to get hold of something, maybe there's an object you're looking for, then possession in great measure might say, yeah, you're going to get hold of it. It will be fine. But you shouldn't be entirely material about possession in great measure. Possessions can be knowledge, experience, something you're looking for. And there is this question about possession in great measure. Is it, with this hexagram, is it predicting that you are going to get possession in great measure? Or is it actually saying you've already got possession in great measure? And maybe that's the case. And we've got our resources together, finally, and we're getting them together. and we realize we've got everything we need. And that means we have got possession in great measure. So there's nothing to complain about. And finally, I want to look at King Charles. Forgive me if I sometimes call him Prince Charles, but, for most of my life, as someone born in the UK, I've just got so used to calling him Prince Charles. It's difficult to make that transition to calling him King Charles. So let's start off by looking at his chart. And what am I trying to achieve here? Why am I looking at his chart? There's no particular reason I'm looking at his chart, except I do think that this full moon may have had an impact on him. And I just thought it might be a good idea to have a bit of an update and to review some astrological techniques. I am not trying to predict when he's going to die, but I might sort of mention the process in a theoretical way. In a theoretical way, I must emphasize that. So, King Charles, the British king, and he very much represents the country. If you are of the view that the medieval king is the body of the country. So how the king goes is so goes the country. As the country goes, so goes the king. And you might argue that with King Charles, King Charles has had his health problems. He's got cancer. I have no idea how his treatment is going. One assumes it's going fine. If anyone can afford the best medical treatment in the world, it would be King Charles. And by the way, here is his chart. So you could argue that King Charles's illness is just saying something about Britain. It's just saying that Britain is sick. The whole country is sick. There's something wrong with it. And it's not just about the Starmer government. It's just about what's been going on politically in the country over the last few years, maybe longer. I mean, if you're not a fan of the Tories, you say, well, you had 14 years of Conservative government, but it didn't do the country any good. But yeah, he could be representative of the country, and his sickness could also be a representative of it. So when we look at King Charles's chart, we may indeed be looking at the chart of the UK. A controversial point, and you could say, well, he's a constitutional monarch, he doesn't have any power, but he still has a symbolic importance, and he still is the head of state. Now, with King Charles, I pointed out that there was a full moon on Monday, and I speculated that this full moon could potentially have an impact on him. So let's just go back to this. Let's go back to this full moon. So this was the full moon yesterday on May the 12th. So this full moon was at 22:13 Scorpio. And so if you contrast King Charles's chart with the full moon chart, then there is his sun, and his sun is at 22:25. So this full moon is exactly on Charles's sun, and you might straight away think that represents a threat to him and a threat to his health, given that he has been sick with cancer and he's having chemotherapy. So the sun certainly would represent his vitality. Does it represent his life? I'm not convinced that the sun does represent his life, by the way. If you take a sort of a traditional Western astrological approach, what you're trying to do, if you happen to be predicting death, you would be looking for a transit to, or a direction to the high leg, Hyleg, and the high leg is the giver of life in someone's chart. And there are rules for finding the high leg, and John Worsdale, the early 19th century astrologer who was specialized in predicting death, he always said that what you should be looking for is a particular direction to the high leg, and he would call that the terminus vitae. That is the direction that kills. And with Charles, he was born at night. His sun was, really, not on the IC, but really at the bottom, close to the bottom of the chart. So the sun can't be high leg. What can be high leg is the moon. So if it's a nighttime chart, you might look to the moon as being a potential high leg, provided the moon is in a high legical place. And I would have said that the moon in the 10th house very much is in a high legical place. So if you were trying to predict Charles's death, which you shouldn't do, I remember I'm talking about this in a theoretical way, you should be looking at the moon and not the sun. And I'll be looking at primary directions just shortly. So the full moon on his sun is not necessarily, it's not going to kill him if you use traditional astrology, because the sun is not the ruler of his life. It's not his high leg, but yeah, it could still undermine his general sort of well-being. And to get an idea about what the full moon on his sun might have done. I know I looked at the full moon yesterday, but let's have another look at it. So let's just have a look at the state of Charles's sun. So his sun is on the 5th house cusp, and that might say that this full moon has something to do with children. And we know that he's got 2 sons, and one of those sons is a bit of a problem, and that may say something about his relationship with his problem son. And the full moon really, it becomes very clear to him, what it's all about. Maybe with a full moon. With a full moon, we are talking about estrangement, and I'm not really following that drama. I know. You probably know more about it than me, but you can see how that full moon on his sun, and the sun is a male planet, so yeah, the sun might indeed could represent a sun in Scorpio who is quite brooding, quite angry. You could argue that. Of course, he's got another son, William, who doesn't seem to be a problem between his relationship between William. But full moon is about sun, and we can also look at Charles's solar midpoint to see what midpoints the sun is on. So if you've got a transit to a planet, it's always a good idea to look at the midpoints. I'm not saying I'm going to find anything useful. I haven't looked at his solar midpoints in preparation for this. So oops. So there's his sun, and so we can notice how his sun is very close to Kronos, and Kronos is making a hard aspect to Kronos. So sun and Kronos together, just could represent him as king. Kronos is about government. It's about authority. So someone having a sun Kronos hard aspect with a full moon on it says something about his authority and how that authority changes, and he may see the limits of his authority, or perhaps the limits of his power. And you can see that the full moon is very close to his sun Kronos midpoint. So that's one aspect of it. It's also on his Venus-Jupiter midpoint, so it's not all bad. So Venus-Jupiter, the two benefics are brought together by this full moon. So he's got Sun on his Venus-Jupiter midpoint anyway, always, and so you could say there's something fortunate about that. You could say that he does have a certain optimism there, and maybe this full moon brings it out into the open. Maybe it's not all bad, this full moon. But the thing about this full moon, which I think is important, is the fact that it does actually take place quite close to his demi-return. I mean, it must by definition, but by what do I mean by demi-return? Well, King Charles was born in November, so here is King Charles's chart, and so what you can do with astrology is you have a solar return every year. But there's also a half return where the sun moves on 6 months. So to calculate the demi-return, you just take the precise moment where the sun is exactly 180 degrees from the natal sun. So here is Charles's demi-return for May the 12th, which was yesterday, Monday. So Sun exactly opposition his natal sun, and it took place at the time of a full moon. So the very fact that this demi-return took place on a full moon really indicates that it could be an important event. Maybe the next 6 months could be of significance, and what makes this this demi-return important is it is the full moon. It's the fact that he has got he in his natal chart has moon in Taurus and the sun in Scorpio. Of course, in this chart it's reversed. He's got the sun in Taurus and moon in Scorpio, and you can see the Uranus influence here. So the moon is opposition Uranus and his demi-return. It's obviously opposition the sun. It's pretty close to the Sun-Uranus midpoint, and we also have Jupiter on the descendant. So the ruler of the ascendant on the descendant. We've got a sort of reversal idea, and of course we've also got a reversal idea with this full moon in the opposite signs from his own full moon. Okay, he was born relatively close to a full moon of his moon in Taurus and his sun in Scorpio. And so there are hints here that this might be a significant 6-month period in his life. So let's go back to his previous return, his return for his last birthday. And his return for his last birthday was actually pretty dramatic. And it had sun rising and moon at 0 degrees Taurus. So it wasn't his last solar return wasn't just a solar return, it was also a lunar return, and they were happening at the same time. And Uranus was exactly on the descendant. So and Saturn's on the IC. So how does one actually see this solar return? Is this about King Charles, or is it about the country he rules? I mean, it arguably is descriptive of his country, and we've got the sun opposition Uranus on the ascendant, on the descendant, Saturn on the IC. It's not a country that's happy with itself, but it may say something about him and his health. And if you want to play Chiron was on the 5th house cusp. That may say something about the sun, who is currently estranged from, and the moon is in the 5th. So a very dramatic solar return, and this solar return will be active through until his next birthday. The demi-return may give us a little bit of an idea about the last 6 months between now and his birthday and his birthday next November, when he will be, let's get this right, he's just turned 70, he's 76 and a half at the moment, so he's going to be 77 next birthday. And so one thing about Charles's chart, if you're into profections, so from a profection view, you change ascendant sign every year, and every 12 years you repeat. So he's got Leo rising, so Leo rising covers him for all the multiples of 12. So when he's 12 years old, when he's 24, 36, and so on. So when he turns 72, Leo would repeat itself, but he's now turned 76, so 72, 73, 74, 75, 76. So currently he's covered by Sagittarius. Now you might say that this year he does receive some protection because he has Jupiter in Sagittarius. Okay, if you're into anaretic degrees, it's right at the end of Sagittarius, but Jupiter is his annual ruler, and yeah, it is in its own sign, and so maybe that provides some protection to him this year. And of course, when he hits his next birthday, he will change. It will move from Sagittarius to Capricorn. So his annual ruler would change from Jupiter to Saturn. So I thought that his returns do continue to indicate a difficult year. And yeah, his last solar return was certainly dramatic. And one thing one might want to look at is his solar arc direction. So he has just turned. So he's 76 and a half. So we would move all the planets in his chart 76 and a half degrees, and so we come to this chart. And just looking at where the directions are. So his solar arc directed Saturn is at 23 Scorpio. Now he has his Sun at 22-25 Scorpio. So theoretically, around 6 months ago, he had solar arc directed Saturn exactly on his Sun, and this could have said something about his health, but he's had health problems. His cancer issue has been going on for longer than 6 months. I think it started, I can't remember when it started. Has it been going on for 18 months? Something like that. So you could say, well, as Saturn, solar arc directed Saturn, started to move towards a conjunction of the Sun, that was when his health was undermined. Of course, the Sun also says something about his children, and one thinking in particular of his problems with his younger child. And so that's one way of looking at it. And you could say he's got solar arc directed Saturn on his Sun, and now he's got a full moon on his Sun. So that's putting extra pressure on him and on his leadership, remembering that he has got Sun making a hard aspect to Kronos in his natal chart. Another solar arc direction is the midheaven. Solar arc directed midheaven is at 1 degree 2 Cancer. So what's been happening over the last couple of years is that solar arc directed midheaven has been on his Uranus, has been conjunct his Uranus and opposition his Jupiter, because King Charles has an exact Jupiter-Uranus opposition in his horoscope. He wants to be free, perhaps, or he wants to have his say. As King Charles, as Prince Charles, he would send lots of letters to the government trying to have an influence. So that might be Jupiter opposition Uranus, but he wants to do his his own thing, and you could say that the midheaven, as it aspected his Jupiter-Uranus opposition, well, that was when his mother died and when he became king. But you could then say, well, the midheaven is starting to move away from his Uranus. Now, I wanted to finish with primary directions, and primary directions are used to predict death. Now, I'm not predicting Charles's death. I know he's very sick, but I'm doing this from a theoretical viewpoint. How might one use primary directions when one thinks about the issue of death? And primary directions are about the movement of the Earth in the hours after we were born. So the Earth is always moving around. Approximately, it moves. Approximately it will move 360 degrees in a day. So you could then say, using primary direction, that for every degree that the Earth moves, it represents 1 year of life. So that would mean that if you happen to live to, say, 120 years represents a third of the circle. So those 120 years are encapsulated in the first 8 hours of life. So the first 8 hours of life represent the maximum human lifespan. So you track the Earth around, and it's a technique which is incredibly complicated to work out by hand. So that's probably why it fell out of use. Ironically, it kind of fell out of use as astrology became more popular, because at the beginning of the 20th century, when you started to see textbooks of the mass market on astrology, people just would not be able to use primaries. So I think someone like Alan Leo was early 20th century British astrologer. I think he tried to make it simpler. And so in a way, astrology got dumbed down during the 20th century because people couldn't deal with primaries. But of course now with computers, you can calculate them instantly, and there is a free program, Pymorinus.exe, Pymorinus, Pymorinus, and if you Google that, you'll find it, and you can download it for free. And it is very good, and it's probably better than some of the programs you pay for that provide primaries. And so if we look at King Charles's primaries, well, what does that mean? So if you think about Charles, he is 76. So he's 76 and a half years old. So if we convert 76, so that means we want to know what things look like when you've moved the Earth 76 degrees. And approximately at what time of day did the Earth move 76 degrees? So if Charles was born at 9:14, then the Earth will have moved 76 degrees at approximately 2:22 a.m. on November the 15th. So that would be just over 5 hours later. And so primaries, in a way, are just looking at the chart where his primary is now for when he's 76 and a half. You are basically looking at what the planets look like 76 and a half degrees on, and then how they relate back to the natal chart. So from Charles's perspective, if we set up a chart for Charles's directions, then in other words, if we set up a chart for November the 15th, 1948, so approximately just over 5 hours after he was born, look at how things have changed. So he has a Jupiter-Uranus opposition in his natal chart, and that Jupiter-Uranus opposition, if we go back to his just to remind you, so his Jupiter-Uranus opposition, you can see he's got Uranus on the 12th house cusp. He's got Jupiter there, so there it was. But it's rising now as time elapses. Uranus will move forward to the midheaven, and so around now, Uranus is getting up there. It's moving towards the midheaven. Theoretically, within the next 6 months or so, or maybe a year, 6 months to a year, that Jupiter-Uranus opposition will have got there, will have got right the way up there. So, what does that mean? You wouldn't predict death, for example, with a Jupiter-Uranus opposition, but it may be about his position as a monarch, how he sees it. It could be, for example, about abdication. That will be one way. He is free. Though, if you wanted to play death, you could say that death is freedom, but you would not predict death on the basis of a Jupiter-Uranus opposition. But something's going on from a primary perspective, and notice with the solar arc directions how a few years ago the midheaven hit his Uranus. So it's a similar kind of aspect, but the timing is slightly different. So he's really in a Uranus midheaven period of life, and part of it is about him becoming king, but also it's also about what he does with that role and how that role changes. Now, when you're looking at primary directions, you are considering you're considering aspects, but you're considering in mundo aspects. That means not aspects following the degrees of the zodiac, but following the houses. Now, if we move Charles's chart 5 hours later, look at the Sun and Saturn. The Sun is exactly on the third house cusp, and Saturn is exactly on the 12th house cusp. This is the position of the planets just over 5 hours after he was born. So there is a in mundo square between the Sun and Saturn. You see, you can regard that as being square, even though you can see that by zodiac they're not in square at all. But by houses, they are in square, because you've got 3 exact houses separating the Sun and Saturn. And so in mundo, you could say that there is a Sun-Saturn square forming. And this Sun in mundo square is perhaps saying something about his health issues. And just going back to his natal chart, looking at his Sun and Saturn. So there's his Sun and Saturn. So his Sun is on the 5th house cusp, but the Saturn is short of the is completely short of the cusp. So he was not born with a Sun-Saturn mundo square, but by primary direction, the Sun and Saturn were making an in mundo square 5 hours after he was born. So where is this leading? So where this is leading is the moon. So the moon is Charles's high leg. So it is the giver of life. And so using Worsdale's perspective, he would say if you would, when you have a bad aspect to the moon, a bad direction to the moon, that is potentially terminus vitae. This is a direction that kills. So if you were Worsdale and if you were trying to predict when Charles was going to die, you would be looking very much at in mundo aspects to his moon. And so his moon, if you look at his moon in his natal chart, his moon is in the middle of the 10th house. pretty much, approximately. It's in the middle of his 10th house. So going to his directed chart, you can see that Saturn is 1.5 degrees away from the middle of the 10th house. So the moon has a shadow there in the 10th house. Even though it's nowhere near the moon is, the direction is to that shadow place relative to the horizon where the moon used to be. And Saturn is making a 45-degree aspect to the moon. Again, it's a hard aspect. You can use hard aspects if you were trying to predict death. Likewise, the sun is making so the Saturn is 1.5 houses away from the shadow of the moon, where the moon used to be relative to the horizon, and the sun is 4.5 houses, which 4.5 houses, well, that's 135 degrees, which is a sesquiquadrate. So what I'm saying is that the sun and Saturn are making sesquiquadrate to his moon by direction in mundo. And if we want to be precise about it, then it seems that in I worked this out, this aspect takes place in early 2026. January 2026, Saturn is making an in-mundo semi-square to his moon. In March 2026, the Sun is making an in-mundo sesquiquadrate to his moon. So if I was Worsdale, I might say that at the beginning of 2026, you could say that Charles's life is in huge danger, but this is all theoretical. I'm not predicting that he's going to die at the beginning of 2026. I'm just showing you how people used to do it, at least as I understand it. And you've got to look at other things. You've got to look at confirmations, and his Saturn. He's already had Pluto making the transit to his moon. He's got over that. So, and his Saturn is not going to be conjunct his moon until 2028. So I don't think that one needs to take this too seriously. Plus, he's got the best medical care in the world, the best medical care that money could buy. And again, I must emphasize what I'm doing is I'm just showing you how one could do it. I'm certainly not making any predictions. So those are a few thoughts on King Charles. Don't take me too seriously. I hope you find that of some interest. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.